Topical Talks. And this time of year is not perhaps the best time of year to be thinking about getting out there and collecting edible plants from the glorious Gloucestershire countryside. However, spring is just around the corner, and our very own Cotswold Forager, otherwise known as Rob Gould, will be doing up his walking boots, won't you, Rob?
Yeah, definitely. It'll be good to get out again as well after the period we've had recently. But yeah, looking at things, they're just about starting to come up. Wild garlic's coming through. We've got some nice other little bits and pieces coming. So yeah, it's a really good time to start getting out there and exploring a bit more.
Absolutely right. So you're here today to talk specifically about foraging. So yeah, give us a sort of a Mickey Mouse guide. What exactly is foraging?
So if you look in the dictionary, foraging is technically going out and collecting a resource that you require. So it covers so much more than what we nowadays class as foraging. So for example, if you wanted to go out and gather, I don't know, water, that would be foraging. But as far as most people are concerned nowadays, it's gathering food for yourself. And nowadays, most people have defined it down even more to gathering wild fruits or vegetables or herbs or leaves or greens. So yeah, it's going out and gathering wild food that you can eat in your own home.
Which, of course, our ancestors did thousands of years ago, didn't they? And
absolutely.
That's what they did, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you get started in this? Was it because you were hungry, or was it just an interest?
It was, to be honest, I always feel a bit guilty when I say this. It was when I was at horticulture college, and I was going to the library quite regularly to do research for work I was doing, and as tended to happen at the time then, it doesn't happen quite so much now. The library was selling off some of the old books that they'd had for the previous sort of few years, and I picked up a couple of foraging books and a couple of other outdoors books and picked them up next to nothing, went home and literally devoured them in a couple of days. And the next time I went back in, they had a few more, and the librarian had kept some to the one side for me. And it just sort of grew from there. So that was sort of 20 years ago now. And at the time, I always joked that finding out about foraging when I just started college was amazing, because it meant that I could, and I was cooking for myself, it meant I could go out and I didn't have to buy quite so much, and it meant there was a bit money for me.
Good for you. So what are the sort of, I mean, as I say, not at this time of year perhaps, but in the height of the summer or the autumn, what are the sort of common things that people can find themselves and eat safely at home?
So wild garlic is obviously the obvious one. And I mean, for most people, foragers included, it's probably the one that most people get really excited about because it's the first real obvious thing early in the spring. Yeah. It's amazing the amount of people that come on walks with me. And one of the first questions I generally tend to ask is, have you ever done any foraging before? And probably 90% of them say, no, I've never foraged before. And then you say, what, have you never picked wild garlic? Have you never picked blackberries? Have you never picked elderflowers? And then they all go, oh, yes. But people don't seem to think of that as foraging. Yeah. But yeah, wild garlic is an obvious one, great one to start with straight away. There's obviously blackberries, but you've got so many fruits and nuts through the autumn period, and wild greens earlier in the year in the spring. Things like dandelions, we don't tend to consume them that much nowadays. But the fresh spring growth of dandelions is delicious. It's very similar to sort of, if you've ever been to France and had chicory, because we don't have it much over here anymore. It's a bit too bitter for the British palate, but I think it's delicious. And if you pick the leaves and put them in a bowl of water to soak, to get rid of any dirt on them, but also leave them, and it tends to draw out some of that bitterness as well. And then they're effectively a strong flavoured wild green, the same as rocket or watercress. It's something with a bit more punch to it. Very easy to buy. Anyone can identify a dandelion in their garden or in a field. So that's an easy one straight away. And like I say, once you head into the autumn and you've got all those obvious fruits and nuts, but then you've got a lot of nuts and things that we don't really take advantage of. This year there's been, not this year, last year there was a lot of interest in acorns going through the autumn period. I think because of everything that's been happening, people have got a lot of people have got a lot more time on their hands. So a lot of people have got interest in foraging, and because they've had the time, they've got into reading into it. They've had the time to. And yeah, some of the stuff you saw people doing with acorns and things was amazing through this winter, through this autumn.
I think I was going to say one of the things I think many people would be concerned about. I think, I don't know, you may know, is this sense of what is safe. I mean, mushrooms and things like that. I do believe there are some varieties that can make you pretty sick. Is that true?
Absolutely. Although actually, the proportion of mushrooms that can hurt you in this country is lower than the proportion of plants.
Okay.
Especially when you take into account the actual quantity of tea. I mean, there are plenty of plants that we grow in our own gardens out of choice that are far more poisonous than a lot of the things you find in the wild. But yeah, absolutely, there are mushrooms that can do some pretty nasty harm. But the thing to remember is, and the thing I always say to people, whether I'm talking to them in person or whether I'm talking to them on my webpage or whether I'm talking to them on something like Facebook, is it's all well and good somebody telling you what this is, and it's all well and good somebody saying to you, yes, this is edible. But until you're 100% sure for yourself, don't put it in your mouth. And the other thing to remember is, as with common regular foods that we eat, there's always a chance you're going to have a reaction to something. So the very first time you try something new, just have a small amount just to make sure you're not going to have a reaction to it. There are plenty of people out there that there are certain mushrooms that you can pick that 95% of the population can eat with no issues at all. But unfortunately, that 5% of the population, they don't have the right bacteria and enzymes in their body to digest proteins within those certain. So even if it's commonly regarded as being edible, it may not be for you. So it's just
it's worth checking and using one's common sense, and dare I say it, probably look up things on the internet. Without being too rude, I mean, you can't make a living out of foraging. So how do you manage and what do you do now to incorporate this passion you have for foraging?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of people that think you can make money out of selling things to restaurants, but unfortunately nowadays, unless you live in London or somewhere with a big metropolis where they're going to pay sort of good money for good things, it's difficult. So yeah, most of my money now is from teaching people, taking people out into the local countryside, teaching them what to do, writing articles for magazines, but also just taking people out generally. Through the last lockdown we were in, the lockdown just before Christmas that we were in, I took out quite a lot of people on wellbeing walks, just encouraging them to spend more time outside, teaching them about what they could see, because of course then there wasn't much around at that point. Most of the edibles had finished, so we were just going out and talking about the natural history of the areas that we saw. So I think it's, as tends to be the case with a lot of people nowadays, being a forager is very much a portfolio type career. You take in your money from wherever you can, and it's sort of diversifying and covering more bases rather than just concentrating solely on the edibles themselves, which I enjoy, but it's but the money's got to come in somehow.
I understand that one of the people you took on a wellness walk before Christmas was a widow who just wanted your company, really, and your knowledge.
Absolutely. So she was probably late 60s to mid 70s. I didn't ask, but she'd lost her husband. She'd lost her husband a few years before, and she'd said that the two of them used to go out and walking in the countryside quite a lot, but it was always his thing. He enjoyed it, and she did it because he enjoyed it, which a lot of people do very similar things. And she said that she realised that she was missing it, but she didn't have that confidence anymore to go out. So she wanted to go out for a couple of walks just to get her confidence back in being out in the outdoors. And I don't think she was in any way intimidated by being outside. It was just she wanted someone the first couple of times just to get her brain thinking about what she could be looking at, what she could be thinking about, what she could be talking about and doing while she was out there. And we literally walked for a couple of hours each time, and we talked about the trees we saw, the birds we heard, the plants that were growing, and what was happening around us. And it was actually really nice to spend time just conversing about what we saw, rather than trying to overtly give information to someone, because it was far more conversational.
Yeah, and this is primarily in Gloucestershire, or I know you've in the past you've been talking about working in Europe, but you base yourself primarily within the county.
Yeah, primarily in the county, across the Cotswolds and over sort of the other side of the river into the Forest of Dean. I travel further afield. People want me to go to where they are. As long as my travel costs are covered, I'm happy to work anywhere. And that was how it really came about, which was one of the things that was due to happen last year and hopefully will happen in the future. But with everything that's going on, the people that contacted me wanted someone to go out and look at their site, and a lot of people said, "Oh no, I don't know anything about it." And I was like, "Well, I don't know anything about it at the moment, but it's something I can research. It's something it's a really interesting opportunity, and as long as I'm getting paid to get out there, it doesn't matter." So yeah, as long as people are happy to cover me getting to where they are, then I'll go pretty much anywhere. And
people who want to get in touch, Rob, what's the best way to find you?
So I'm on the internet. I've got my own website at Cotswold Forager. It's cotswoldforager.co.uk, or if you just search on Google for @Cotswold Forager, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook through there, Twitter. I think if you search at Cotswold Forager, I'm top of the Google search for most of the things. So very easy to find me that way. And yeah, if people have got any questions, just ping them across. It's part of the reason I do this is because I want to share this knowledge and this enthusiasm that I have, not necessarily just for foraging, but for the outdoors with other people. So I'm always happy to help if I can.
Lovely to talk to you today, Rob. Good luck with everything you do.
And to you. Lovely to speak to you. Bye for now.
Okay,